Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are opening up a file on, well, a political breakup, a really consequential one.
Absolutely. It basically set the stage for one of the largest geographical divisions in modern history. It's huge.
We are talking about the swift, profound unraveling of collaboration between two monumental figures, Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Mahatma Gandhi.
And crucially, Jinnah's resulting departure from the Indian National Congress.
Right.
For listeners diving into this period, the common narrative often jumps straight from, say, early nationalism to partition.
Yes, skips a lot.
It does. But to truly understand 1947, you really have to grasp this period, roughly 1917 to 1922. Because Jinnah wasn't just a leader in Congress. He was, especially after the Lucknow Pact of 1916, widely celebrated.
It was the ambassador of unity, that's what they called him.
Exactly. He embodied the high hopes, the real possibility of Hindu-Muslim collaboration against the British.
So that's the core puzzle we're tackling today. And it's a massive historical pivot point, isn't it? How did the ambassador of unity go from being the shining hope to being completely estranged from the Congress, the main engine of the independence movement? Our mission really is to explore the specific ideological, political, and maybe most importantly, the strategic fault lines that emerged. Almost overnight, it feels like.
Well, yeah. Creating these storm clouds, as you put it, that irrevocably reshaped Indian politics forever.
So setting the stage, we need to remember that post-1916 atmosphere, you mentioned the Lucknow Pact.
Right. The idea of unity wasn't just theoretical talk. It felt tangible. Leaders seemed genuinely convinced that their shared opposition to British rule could overcome, the inherent communal differences.
But history rarely stands still, does it?
Never. And our sources really emphasize this. The tension that quickly surfaced wasn't based on just one simple policy disagreement. It was deeper.
A fundamental clash.
A fundamental, irreconcilable clash in vision and, crucially, in method, how they wanted to achieve independence.
Okay, method. If we're talking about methodology, then we absolutely have to start with the tectonic shift that happened when one man arrived with a totally new political playbook.
Gandhi.
Indeed.
When Mohandas Gandhi returned to India from South Africa around 1915, he wasn't just another returning lawyer, another barrister.
No.
He brought a philosophy, satyagraha, and a whole set of political tools that, they completely transformed the Indian political landscape.
How so? Before him, politics was mostly...
It had largely been the domain of the elite, the educated class. Legislators, lawyers like Jinnah himself, they operated through structured petitions, they worked within legislative councils, they engaged in dialogue aimed at persuading the British administration. Very formal.
Right, working within the system. But Gandhi didn't just join that club.
No, he fundamentally challenged its very existence. And you see the contrast immediately. It's stark.
Jinnah preferred the drawing room, the legislature, the careful art of elite negotiation, getting the right people in a room.
Exactly. Gandhi, on the other hand, went straight to the fields, to the factories. He favored mass mobilization. Millions of people.
That's a crucial distinction, isn't it? It goes way beyond just scale.
It does. Gandhi's introduction of non-cooperation and the active boycott strategy. These were designed to challenge the very legitimacy of the colonial government, using popular moral will.
Disruptive.
His methods were aimed squarely at disruption. Jinnah's constitutionalism, however, sought orderly reform within the established legal and parliamentary frameworks. He wanted to use the rules.
So it's like, if Jinnah was the disciplined courtroom advocate, arguing meticulously within the existing rules.
Then Gandhi was the spiritual revolutionary, organizing millions to just ignore those rules entirely, to bypass them.
And for Jinnah, the constitutional purist, the man steeped in British law, the most jarring element wasn't just mobilizing the masses, it was the language used. He was a thoroughly secular figure, trained in London at Lincoln's Inn. He prided himself on constitutional discipline, on cold, hard legal arguments.
And what's fascinating and quite jarring for Jinnah was Gandhi's deliberate introduction of spiritual language and religious symbolism right into the heart of the political sphere.
Which must have felt completely alien to Jinnah's way of thinking.
Absolutely. But you have to see it from the other side, too. For the vast majority of the Indian population, often illiterate or semi-literate, deeply religious, this approach was, electrifying.
It made resistance feel accessible.
Accessible, moral, and deeply motivating. Suddenly, the struggle wasn't just about filing a formal petition somewhere. It was about inner moral strength, about soul force, as Gandhi termed it.
But looking at it through Jinnah's eyes, A man whose entire political world was built on the precise secular language of parliamentary acts, of laws and statutes.
This blending of religion and politics. Even if the initial goal was uniting communities against the British, it felt utterly alien.
Worse than alien, maybe? He saw it as dangerous.
Yes, potentially dangerous. That was the word he used. He worried it undermined the rational secular foundation he believed was absolutely necessary for the stable modern state he hoped India would become.
He thought once you open that door to religious passion in politics, it's impossible to close it again.
That seems to be his core fear, that it would unleash forces you couldn't control later. So the initial rift really was a clash of operating systems.
Operating systems, I like that.
Jinnah saw political action as this structured, rational process. It was designed to result in measurable, codified legal change, step by step.
Whereas Gandhi saw it more as
As a moral and spiritual quest, one that required popular sacrifice, symbolic acts, moral defiance, less about laws, more about collective will.
So, okay, they fundamentally disagreed on method. How did that translate into actual political fear? What was Jinnah truly afraid of losing by adopting Gandhi's approach?
That's where it gets really interesting. This philosophical clash about the mechanics of reform is probably the deepest layer of the split. It's the orderly path versus the defiant one.
Tell us more about that. Jinnah's core belief.
His core belief, absolutely cemented by his professional identity as a lawyer, was that reform must be orderly. His faith was entirely placed in institutions.
Like legislation.
Legislatures, yes. Carefully considered committees, structured, informed dialogue between elites. He believed the only legitimate, and indeed the only safe way to achieve lasting change, was to prove methodically to the British and the world that Indians were capable of inheriting and managing a complex administrative state. Show competence.
Okay, so order, institutions, proving capability. Conversely, Gandhi's faith was elsewhere.
Completely elsewhere. His faith was in the irresistible moral power of the people, the masses. His methods called for mobilizing them, calling widespread economic strikes, boycotts, and outright defying British authority through civil disobedience.
Direct action, disruptive action.
Versus reasoned structural debate within the system.
This profound difference must have led to very different risk assessments. How did Jinnah see the risks in Gandhi's approach?
To Jinnah, Gandhi's method, this call for immediate, massive disobedience, often operating outside the clear rule of law, seemed to risk pure anarchy. That was his great fear.
Anarchy, like total chaos.
The breakdown of social order, potentially leading to mob rule, where reasoned debate, the kind he valued, becomes impossible. He often stressed that such volatility could empower reactionaries, extremists on all sides. It was just too unpredictable.
And from the other perspective, how did Gandhi and his followers see the risks in Jinnah's method?
Well, Jinnah's cautious constitutional approach seemed hopelessly slow, too elite, involving only a small number of educated men, and crucially, too dependent on British good faith, on their willingness to grant concessions.
Which hadn't exactly yielded spectacular results up to that point?
Precisely. After decades of constitutional effort bringing only minimal, often frustrating results, Gandhi and his followers saw Jinnah's method as perpetuating stagnation, sacrificing speed and popular energy for a kind of stability that ultimately was still serving the colonial power.
It's important to understand Jinnah's rigidity here, though, isn't it? It wasn't just stubbornness.
No, not at all. Our sources emphasize that you have to see it in context. He genuinely feared the difficulty of transitioning a successful popular movement, one built on emotional appeals, perhaps religious fervor, into a functional, stable, diverse democracy governed by the rule of law afterwards.
So his thinking was, chaos now might mean a failed state later.
That was the intellectual weight behind his position, yes.
Yeah.
That the methods you use to gain power shape the kind of state you build. So this philosophical difference, this language of law versus the language of mass spirituality, it might have remained a theoretical debate, perhaps.
But then a global crisis hit.
Exactly. A global crisis provided the perfect and ultimately devastating stage for this divergence to become a full-blown political rupture.
The Khilafat Movement.
The Khilafat Movement. Spanning roughly 1919 and 1924, it provided the immediate real-world test for these competing ideologies.
Can you give us the context? What was it about?
Sure. It's vital context. Following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War I, Muslim leaders in India became fiercely concerned about the fate of the Ottoman Caliphate.
Which was seen by many Muslims as
the temporal and spiritual head of the worldwide Muslim community, the Khalifa. Its potential abolition by the victorious allies, particularly the British, was a huge issue for Indian Muslims.
Okay, so an issue completely external to India's own independence movement, technically.
Technically, yes.
Yeah.
Yet it became this incredibly powerful rallying cry for domestic political action within India. And Gandhi saw this intense emotional and religious fervor surrounding the Khilafat cause.
And he saw a strategic political opportunity.
Exactly. Brilliant in a way. Gandhi's strategy was straightforward. By wholeheartedly supporting the Khilafat cause, a deeply felt Muslim religious and political concern, he could forge an unprecedented alliance.
Unite Hindus and Muslims against the British.
Under a common, highly emotional banner of anti-British defiance. And the engine for this entire joint effort, his preferred technique, non-cooperation, boycotts, mass protests.
But this is precisely where Jinnah drew the line, a hard, uncrossable line for him.
Absolutely. He was personally sympathetic to the concerns about the fate of the caliphate itself. He understood why Muslims were agitated,
Not.
but he vehemently rejected the strategy of mixing this specific religious issue with the broader politics of national liberation in this particular manner, especially using non-cooperation as the tool.
What were his specific objections? What did he argue in those intense Congress meetings?
His objection was really twofold, according to the sources, structural and ethical.
Okay, structural first.
Structurally, he argued that non-cooperation calling for boycotts of courts, schools, legislative councils was destroying the very institutions they were supposedly preparing to inherit from the British.
As a barrister, as a legislator?
He viewed the systematic dismantling of the legal and administrative system, even a flawed colonial one, as catastrophic for the future. You needed those structures.
And the ethical objection.
Ethically, he viewed Gandhi's strategy as, well, perhaps cynical, leveraging a temporary pan-Islamic religious sentiment, something external to India's core issues for short-term political gain, namely immediate Hindu-Muslim unity. He saw this as corrosive to India's long-term goal of building a stable, secular state.
So he was basically arguing that using religious tools to achieve a political goal would inevitably result in religious politics dominating, not secular independence.
That's precisely the core of his argument. And Jinnah didn't just quietly disagree in committees. He issued explicit, almost chilling warnings publicly.
What did he warn about?
He stated quite clearly that this kind of mass civil disobedience, especially when linked so tightly to intense religious fervor like the Khilafat issue, would inevitably lead to chaos, to sectarianism, and ultimately to violence.
He saw it as a direct consequence of abandoning the rule of law.
Yes, abandoning the rule of law for the rule of raw, unchanneled, religiously charged emotion. He predicted it would spin out of control.
And tragically, his most dire fears, they were borne out, weren't they?
They were. The non-cooperation movement, despite its massive scale and that initial promise of unity, did spiral quickly out of organizational control in several places, and it did lead to communal violence.
The defining moment being Chauri Chaura.
The defining moment, absolutely, was the Chauri Chaura incident in February 1922. For those unfamiliar, what happened was participants in a mass procession, part of the broader non-cooperation effort, clashed with police in a rural marketplace in UP.
And it escalated badly.
Terribly.
Yeah.
The resulting escalation saw an angry mob attack and set fire to a police station, burning alive 22 policemen trapped inside.
Horrific event.
Yeah.
And it shocked the entire movement, including Gandhi himself.
Deeply. Gandhi, realizing the movement had irrevocably crossed his own moral line of nonviolence, agitation, immediately suspended the entire non-cooperation campaign across India.
Which essentially halted the momentum of that joint Hindu-Muslim struggle built around Khilafat and non-cooperation.
Yes. But for Jinnah, Chauri Chaura was far more than just a policy setback or a tactical error. It was the ultimate tragic validation of his entire constitutional philosophy.
It proved him right, in his mind.
It cemented his conviction that mass agitation operating outside clear constitutional and secular boundaries was inherently volatile, inherently destructive, and that it carried the intolerable risk of descending into mob rule and sectarian violence. This single event really served as the most significant ideological turning point for Jinnah personally.
Moving him from being a hopeful constitutionalist within Congress
to being a hardened skeptic of populist movements, especially those intertwined with religion, he saw the danger firsthand.
So if Khilafat and Chauri Chaura demonstrated the physical danger of these new methods, the organizational changes happening within Congress around the same time really cemented Jinnah's ideological and, well, cultural isolation.
That's a great way to put it. He was becoming a stranger in his own political house.
How so? as Gandhi's influence became basically absolute.
The fundamental character, the whole atmosphere of the Congress organization transformed. Jinnah, the disciplined, always English-suited, meticulously prepared lawyer, he increasingly felt out of sync, out of place.
The atmosphere changed that drastically.
Completely. Congress sessions were no longer primarily these sober, legalistic negotiation spaces where barristers like him would argue over the precise wording of resolutions and petitions.
They became
Dominated by emotional speeches, mass slogans, rousing calls for immediate boycotts of everything British, and a real focus on moral purity, on personal sacrifice, rather than just political strategy.
And this shift wasn't just talk, it was symbolic too, right? You mentioned specific examples.
Yes, the shift was highly symbolic, and these symbols illustrate the cultural exclusion Jinnah felt. For instance, the reliance on the spinning wheel, the charkha, and wearing khadi homespun cloth became almost mandatory.
A powerful symbol of self-sufficiency for Gandhi's followers.
Absolutely. But also a kind of moral requirement that stood in stark contrast to Jinnah's modern westernized aesthetic and his focus on industrial progress. Then there was the political use of fasts by Gandhi as a tool.
And mass prayers.
And the organization of mass prayers during political gatherings. These things replaced the technical language of law, the legal arguments, the constitutional debates that Jinnah viewed as the only proper, rational basis for political engagement.
It really highlights that the conflict wasn't just ideological. It had become stylistic, almost aesthetic. Jinnah's bespoke suits and precise English debates clashed violently, you could say, with Gandhi's loincloth and mass prayer meetings.
It was almost a physical metaphor for their methodological incompatibility.
And that cultural drift, that feeling of being out of place, eventually led Jinnah to take definitive action.
He resigned from Congress. Not quietly either. He did it in frustration, but also with a very public declaration.
What was his reasoning?
He declared that India required sober leadership, and he explicitly rejected what he now publicly labeled unconstitutional methods. The sources suggest the severity of his language really underscored how deeply principled his stance was.
He wasn't just leaving over a minor disagreement.
No, he was leaving because he believed the entire direction of the movement had become, in his view, morally bankrupt and strategically unsound. Destructive, even.
This resignation, it marks a monumental turning point, doesn't it? A permanent one.
Absolutely permanent. The man who was lauded just a few years earlier as the ambassador of unity consciously, deliberately separated himself from the main independence movement. He chose constitutional principle and his vision of secular methodology over political expediency and mass popularity.
And that action forced him onto a difficult path.
Very difficult. It led to what historians often refer to as his years of political isolation, the wilderness years, some call them. He was the ambassador without a mission, in a sense, still committed intellectually to Hindu-Muslim unity, but utterly unwilling to accept the methods now required by the new Congress leadership under Gandhi.
And this political void he left, especially in the 1920s, allowed the broader political landscape to just harden along those existing divisions, didn't it?
It really did. The sources highlight that three interconnected forces were driving intense polarization in that decade, following Jinnah's departure and the collapse of Khilafat unity.
What were those forces?
Firstly, following Gandhi's complete triumph within Congress, Hindus increasingly consolidated their support behind his leadership. Congress became seen by many as the singular, undisputed voice of the independence movement.
Which left less space for other types of Hindu leaders.
Less space for secular, constitutional, non-Congress Hindu leaders. Yes. Secondly, on the Muslim side, those who had poured immense religious and political energy into the Khilafat cause were left profoundly disillusioned when the whole movement collapsed, especially after Turkey itself, under Ataturk, abolished the caliphate in 1924.
So the unity Gandhi hoped to forge was fractured.
Completely fractured, leaving many Muslim leaders feeling adrift, searching desperately for a new political identity, perhaps a more secular one, separate from the Congress mainstream, which now seemed overwhelmingly Hindu in character, despite its secular constitution.
And the third force. We can't forget them.
We cannot. The British, they actively and quite effectively exploited these inherent divisions, the constitutional rift between Jinnah and Gandhi, the philosophical split, the resulting communal disillusionment.
How did they exploit it?
By playing different groups off against each other, offering just enough constitutional reform to appease some moderates, while simultaneously reinforcing the divisions among the population through administrative policies and, frankly, fueling mistrust. Divide and rule, classic strategy.
And Jinnah, Observing all this from his somewhat isolated position, he still wanted unity.
Intellectually, yes, that remained his political ideal for some time. But he was now absolutely convinced, hardened by experience, that genuine lasting unity could not be built on what he viewed as the unstable foundations of populist, religiously charged politics that Congress, under Gandhi's overwhelming influence, had adopted.
That's a crucial takeaway, isn't it, for our listeners?
I think so. Jinnah did not leave Congress in 1920 because he had suddenly embraced communal politics or desired immediate separation. That came much later.
He left because of the method.
He left because he fundamentally believed the chosen method populist, religiously infused non-constitutional agitation was inherently detrimental to achieving the orderly, stable, modern, and ultimately secular state he envisioned for India. His conviction, right or wrong, was that the ends, however noble, do not justify self-destructive means.
Okay, let's try to synthesize this. It's a profound period. If we look beyond the specific names and dates, what are the critical lessons that emerge from this turbulent era? Lessons that might even apply to modern political dynamics?
I think we can pull out three key takeaways. The first, and perhaps most obvious, is simply that methods matter. Immensely.
How so?
We often simplify history, right? We focus only on the final goal, in this case, independence. But this era proves that even well-meaning leaders, people who might share identical ultimate objectives, can be fundamentally and irreconcilably divided purely by their choice of methodology.
Jinnah's legalism versus Gandhi's populism.
Exactly. They were just incompatible operating systems, as we said, for achieving the same stated goal of ending British rule.
Okay, lesson one. Methods matter. What's the second?
The second lesson builds directly on that. It's about the basis of trust in political movements.
Trust in the goal or trust in the method?
Both. But crucially, trust in the method. Unity requires trust not just in the eventual goal, but in the shared, predictable methods used to achieve it. When Congress, under Gandhi's influence, suddenly pivoted, abandoning its traditional constitutional path for unpredictable mass agitation, it immediately alienated the constitutionalists.
Like Jinnah.
Like Jinnah, who depended entirely on clear, predictable rules of political engagement. That shift broke the methodological trust.
And that breakdown of trust in how things are done, you see that constantly in modern movements too, don't you?
All the time. When a political party or movement shifts its fundamental approach, say, moving from structured debate to radical street protests, or maybe the other way around, it inevitably sheds those key members whose principles adhere rigidly to the older established system.
Jinnah chose his principles over the party line.
He did. And he paid the price, certainly in the short term, with political isolation.
Right. And the third lesson, you said there were three.
The third, and perhaps the most enduring lesson, is that the fundamental clash we saw here between Jinnah's deep faith in constitutionalism and Gandhi's equally deep faith in disruptive populism, well, that's a debate that recurs perpetually.
In every democracy.
In pretty much every democracy or movement facing systemic challenges, we see this tension constantly, everywhere, even today. Between those who believe lasting, legitimate change must be slow, procedural, incremental, and based firmly in law, versus those who believe urgent change demands rapid, disruptive action, driven by the moral power of mass protest, even if it bends or breaks existing rules.
Jinnah championed the rule of law as the foundation for future stability.
And Gandhi championed the moral force of the people to achieve immediate freedom. That fundamental, intractable tension, it drove the split, and it ultimately created two distinct paths, two different trajectories for Indian political destiny.
So, by the mid-1920s, the storm clouds had well and truly broken. Jinnah was disillusioned, had left Congress, sticking rigidly to his principles, somewhat isolated in his legal chambers.
While Gandhi was the unrivaled leader of mass, populist politics, steering the course of the independence movement by harnessing that incredible emotional and moral energy of the populace.
For Jinnah, you mentioned the sources note this next phase, the mid-1920s through the early 1930s, was one of profound difficulty. Political marginalization.
Yes, it was. He was the ambassador without a portfolio, as we said, waiting perhaps for an opportunity that fit his unwavering constitutional standards, which seemed increasingly out of step with the main currents of Indian politics.
But this period of political trial, this refusal to compromise on his core beliefs about method, it served a purpose.
It seems it served a vital, transformative purpose. This time of isolation wasn't just stagnation, it was, in a way, preparation.
Preparation for what?
Well, the political fracture caused by the Khilafat Movement, the principles reinforced by the tragedy of Chauri Chaura. All of this ultimately prepared Jinnah for a significant return to politics later on. But this time, it wouldn't be as a constitutional moderate seeking unity within a single Indian framework.
His experience had changed him, or changed his strategy.
It had taught him, perhaps, that the strictly constitutional route he cherished was simply incompatible with the populist path Congress was irrevocably taking. This hard lesson forced him, eventually, towards a different vision.
A greater vision, you said in the outline.
Perhaps different is better. A vision that necessitated a stronger, separate conviction, which ultimately led him towards demanding leadership not just within India, but leadership of a separate destiny for Muslims.
And that is the powerful, lingering question we can leave our listeners with today, isn't it, as you consider this historical moment?
When does a necessary political break, one born, initially at least, purely of profound principal difference regarding methodology, become the unexpected catalyst for an entirely new, unforeseen political creation? Like Pakistan.
The initial split between Jinnah and Gandhi wasn't just a difference of opinion over tactics.
No. It was arguably the birth pangs of two separate national approaches to governance, rooted in fundamentally different philosophies of political action.
We hope this deep dive helps you understand the sheer gravity, the foundational importance of that initial procedural and ideological rupture.
It's where so much of the later story begins.
Thanks for diving deep with us.
Thank you.
We'll catch you next time.